August 3rd, 1945. 1740 hours. POW Stockade, U.S. Army Compound, Guam. The first thing you notice is the sound. Metal spoons on dented tin trays. The low murmur of men in a dozen different accents. Somewhere in the distance, a diesel generator drones, a constant, mosquito-like thrum under everything. And then, distinct above it all, a sharp laugh from behind the wire. You step into the dusty yard of the POW compound, and it hits you like the heat did when you got off the transport. This is not the jungle. This is order. Barbed wire in clean rectangles. Guard towers at the corners, silhouettes of GIs with slung M1s outlined against the bruised evening sky. Inside the fence, long rows of khaki and green. U.S. fatigues on one side of the yard, faded tan and tattered field gray on the other. Japanese uniforms, stripped of insignia, hang loose on thinner frames. Near the mess line, little more than planks on oil drums, a cluster of Imperial Japanese Army officers stands slightly apart from their own men, as if distance can preserve rank even in captivity. They watch the Americans eat. Captain Nakamura Shinji, former regimental staff officer from Saipan, narrows his eyes as a GI strolls by with a tray loaded beyond reason. 2 thick hamburger patties on soft white buns, a mound of mashed potatoes glistening with gravy, a slice of something that might be pie. The American takes a bite big enough to choke a man, chews blissfully, and chases it with a long pull from a sweating glass bottle of Coca-Cola. The cap clinks against his teeth. The fizz is audible from 10 paces away. On the Japanese side of the fence, a murmur runs through the group. Amakuchi, one of the younger lieutenants, sneers under his breath. Sweet mouth. They stuff themselves with sugar like children. Beside him, Lieutenant Saito snorts, thumb hooked in a waistband of his POW trousers where his sword belt used to sit. No wonder they are soft, he says in low, precise Japanese. White bread. Meat every day. Sweet drinks. A stomach like that cannot march. He says it loud enough that a few nearby enlisted men hear. They nod automatically because agreeing has been trained into their spines. Nakamura doesn't nod. He watches the American drain the bottle, wipe his mouth with the back of his hand, and toss the empty into a crate already rattling with glass. His own stomach twists, not from disgust, from something closer to hunger. It's been months since he ate meat that wasn't stringy and boiled to death. Years since he held a loaf of bread that wasn't gray, dense, and cut into ration slices. On the American side of the fence, near the open flap of a big canvas mess tent, Sergeant Joe Donnelly leans against a post, arms crossed, watching the POWs watch them. He's sunburned the color of overcooked ham, sleeves rolled up, a stained apron tied over his fatigues. The rank stripes on his sleeve are almost lost under the grease marks. In another life, he'd be managing a diner in Newark. In this one, he is the U.S. Army's answer to hunger on this dusty patch of Guam. Behind him, the line of GIs snakes past the serving tables, trays clattering, mess kits flashing under bare bulbs as the sun sinks. Burgers again, Sarge, a corporal grins, peering at the grill where patties sizzle and pop, juices flaring as fat hits the coals. You complaining? Donnelly shoots back. Take it up with the Navy. They're the ones who dumped a crate of ground beef on us like they're feeding a ball game. The corporal laughs and moves on. A Navy truck parked nearby is still half loaded with supplies. Crates stamped with U.S. and stenciled markings reading canned, milk, canned peaches, and stacked like bricks of glass sunlight. Coca-Cola, property of U.S. Navy. Donnelly jerks his chin toward the fence. Morales, he calls. PFC Luis Morales, guard detail, glances over, shifting his M1 on his shoulder. Yes, Sarge. You see those fellows over there? Donnelly nods at the cluster of Japanese officers. What's got him so interested? Morales shrugs. Same thing we got, he says. Chow. Only difference is theirs looks like boiled socks, and ours looks like my mama loves me. He squints. They're always gawking, he adds. Half the time, they've got that look like they're about to spit. Other half, he trails off, like they climbed through that wire for a piece of pie. Donnelly finishes. Morales snorts. Sir, yes, sir. A bell clangs. On the Japanese side, the POW mess line begins to move. In battered mess tins and dented rice bowls, ladles of U.S. Army stew. Heavy on barley, light on meat, slop down. A scoop of rice. Some boiled greens. The food is better than most of them had at the end on Saipan, but it's still sparse beside the American trays in full view. The officers get no special portion. Nakamura steps up with the others, mess tin in both hands. The American ladling stew into cans is a freckled kid with his sleeves rolled. He doesn't look at faces, just tins. Stew, rice, greens. Next, from behind, a voice switches to Japanese, awkward, accented. Nakamura Tai, it calls. Captain, you are well. Nakamura turns. At the far end of the line stands a Japanese-American Nisei in U.S. uniform, sidearm at his hip, a small notebook in his hand. Technical Sergeant Ken Tanaka, language detachment, handles interrogations, and paperwork. The POWs hate him and cling to him at the same time. He understands both sides too well. Nakamura inclines his head, just enough to be polite in captivity. "I am alive," he says. "That is more than some." Tanaka's gaze flicks to the American side, where a pair of GIs sit at a crate, splitting open fresh buns, laughing about something. One smears ketchup, a thick, glistening ribbon of red, onto his burger. The bottle catches the light. Nakamura's eyes follow it like a dog tracking a bone. Tanaka sees the flicker. He files it away. "You do not eat there, Pan?" Tanaka asks, a neutral question bred. Nakamura's jaw tightens. "We marched on rice," he says. "We fought on barley and millet. We did not need soft bread and sugar drinks to conquer half the Pacific." His voice is calm. Too calm. The Nisei hears the strain underneath. "As you say," Tanaka replies. But his eyes linger a beat longer on the captain's face. Back by the grill, Donnelly bangs his spatula on the edge of the hot plate to shake off bits of char. Grease pops. A faint cloud of smoke drifts, blown toward the wire by the evening breeze. It carries the smell of grilled beef and onions. 10 meters away, 50 heads turn fractionally toward it. You can almost see the scent hit the Japanese prisoners like a physical thing. One of the younger enlisted men swallows, throat bobbing. "Smell that." Morales calls to another guard on the tower. "Hell, ah." The other GI yells back. "Smells like home." Donnelly snorts. "Smells like I've been chained to this damn grill since Bougainville," he mutters. He hates the heat. He hates the grease. He doesn't hate the look on his boys' faces when they bite into something hot and solid and not from a C-ration tin. He flips another patty, glances at the wire. The POWs are pretending not to stare now, looking just left or right of the Americans, not at them, the way a starving man pretends to read in front of a bakery window. Something tickles the back of Donnelly's mind. He looks at the grill, at the tray of cooked burgers that nobody seems in a hurry to grab now that the first wave has eaten, at the crate of buns, at the stack of Coke bottles sweating themselves into icy holiness in a tub of chipped ice borrowed from the Navy. The officers are arguing now. On the other side of the fence, Side OS voice carries. "Softness," he says. "Look at them. Meat, sugar, ice. They drink like children at a festival. They cannot fight long with bellies like that." Nakamura stares down into his mess tin. The stew is warm. The rice is filling. But his mind keeps replaying the sound of that Coke bottle fizzing open, the pop of the cap, the way condensation ran down glass. He remembers the last time he drank something cold. He can't. Tanaka hears the mockery. He also hears the quiet doubt under it. Donnelly slaps the spatula down on the grill, so hard a bit of grease splashes on his wrist. He jerks his hand back, curses, then laughs at himself. "Morales," he calls again. "What happens to leftover chow from the line?" Morales squints. "Depends," he says. "If it's decent, we pawn it off on the Navy swabbies. If it's not, it goes to the pigs or the trash. Regulations say no special menus for POWs." Donnelly grunts. He looks at the burgers, at the wire, at the officers who keep calling them sugar eaters like it's a curse. "Yeah, well," he mutters, half to himself. Regulations never tried watching a man smell beef like that and pretend he doesn't care. He flips one last patty, lets the smell drift. Somewhere inside him, the part that likes a good prank perks up. Somewhere else, the part that knows a psychological punch when he sees one starts sketching out an idea. He wipes his hands on his apron, grease streaking the already stained fabric. "Hey, Tanaka," he yells toward the fence. "You busy tonight?" The Nisei interpreter looks up. He sees the glint in Donnelly's eye, shakes his head slowly, curious. "No, Sergeant," he says. "What?" Donnelly jerks his thumb toward the grill, then toward the POW enclosure. "Because I got a batch of burgers and a Navy crate of Coca-Cola that says your boys over there don't know half of what they think they know about soft Americans," he says. "And I want to see what happens when sugar meets samurai. You can smell it already. Charred meat, cold glass, and something else rising in the evening heat. Not smoke, not steam. Something closer to the first crack in a story that's been welded into men's skulls for a decade." The Imperial Army told these officers that Americans were soft because of their indulgence. In a few hours, on this dusty patch of Guam, that indulgence is going to be served to them on white bread with ketchup. And the taste of the enemy's abundance is going to hit harder than any leaflet ever dropped from 8B-29. Section 2. The First Bite of the Enemy. The sun is dropping fast, turning Guam's sky the color of watered-down blood. By the time Donnelly drags the extra crate of buns over to the fence, the day has shifted into that strange half-light where the wire glows silver and the shadows under the guard towers go black. Tanaka meets him there, notebook tucked into his belt, helmet pushed back. "You're serious?" the interpreter asks in English, looking from the grill to the POW compound. "You want to feed burgers to Japanese officers?" Donnelly shrugs, the motion making his apron strings flutter. "They're POWs," he says. We're feeding him anyway. Might as well see if the sugar eaters can convert a few pilgrims. He grins, but there's calculation behind it. Then, with a more serious tone, Geneva says adequate rations, right? Doesn't say a damn thing about which rations when we've got leftovers. Morales leans on his rifle, amused. Man wants to run a science experiment, he says. I say let him. Beats counting coconuts. Tanaka huffs a laugh despite himself. All right, he says, but you let me set the rules. Last thing we need is someone thinking you're trying to poison them. Donnelly raises both hands. You're the one with the dictionary, he says. I just flipped the meat. They move to the section of fence closest to the officer's corner, a stretch of double apron wire with a narrow gate used for work details. On the Japanese side, the evening routine is settling in. Men squat near their tents, rolling thin cigarettes from issue tobacco. A few write in battered notebooks. Others just sit and stare at nothing. Nakamura stands with Saito and a small knot of officers near a wash barrel, hands clasped behind his back. He's pretending he doesn't hear the Americans. He hears everything. He watches Tanaka approach the wire and call out in Japanese. Nakamura-tai, the Nisei says. Captain, a word. The other officers stiffen. They always hate hearing their own language in an American uniform. Nakamura considers ignoring him. Curiosity wins. He steps closer, stopping a respectful distance from the fence. Yes, Sergeant, he says, keeping his tone cool. What does your command require now? Not require. Offer, Tanaka replies. The mess sergeant has surplus. He suggests that a few senior officers might sample American rations. As a gesture, he chooses his words carefully. Gesture can mean many things. On the American side, Donnelly lifts a plate with 2 burgers on it, just high enough to be visible. Steam rises in the cooling air. The smell rolls across the gap like a living thing. Saito actually flinches. Not from fear. From the sudden, sharp stab of appetite that overrides discipline for half a heartbeat. He recovers quickly. Gestures are for victors, he says in a low voice to Nakamura. We are not beggars. We have our honor. His stomach growls, audibly. No one comments. Nakamura looks at the burgers. White buns. Dark, seared meat edges. A smear of something red and glossy peeking out the side. Behind them, in a metal tub, ice chunks clink against glass as Morales shifts the Coke bottles. That sound does something to Nakamura's memory. He remembers a town festival as a boy, shaved ice with syrup melting too fast in the summer heat. His father calling it a frivolity, a waste of money. His mother buying it anyway. Rice and barley made soldiers. Sugar made softness. He believed that for years. But the men who ate this food had shelled his battalion into a chalky smear on Saipan. Soft? They were still here. His unit was behind the wire. Captain, Tanaka says gently, switching back to Japanese. You can refuse. That is your right. But your men are watching. They will interpret that refusal in their own way. Nakamura glances back. Heads are turned toward him. Faces pale, eyes huge in the dusk. There is hunger there. Not just for food. For clues. Is this what defeat looks like? Taking bread from the enemy's hand? Or is it something else? If this is humiliation, Saito mutters, he will photograph it. Morales, hearing the tone, if not the words, lifts his hands from his rifle and wiggles his fingers as if to say, no camera. No pictures, Tanaka says aloud, translating without being asked. Only food. You tasted our shells, Captain. Perhaps it is not shameful to taste our meat. It's a clumsy metaphor. It lands anyway. Nakamura's jaw works. He straightens. Very well, he says. 5 of us. No more. Tanaka nods. Agreed, he says. You, Saito Chue, and 3 others you choose. He turns to Donnelly. He'll do it, he says. Donnelly's grin is quick and wolfish. Pull back the posts, Morales, he says. Let's lay out the banquet. They set a small table just outside the inner fence, an old crate with a sheet of brown ration paper over it. On it, Donnelly arranges 5 burgers on chipped enamel plates, a stack of white bread slices at the side, in case they don't understand the concept, and with a certain ceremony, 5 Coca-Cola bottles beaded with condensation. Ice chips cling to the glass like jewels. Under the glare of a bear bulb strung from the fence post, the scene looks almost theatrical. On the Japanese side, the chosen 5 step forward. Nakamura, Saito, a gaunt artillery officer with sunken cheeks. A young naval aviator whose flight jacket has been replaced by standard POW khaki, and a stocky master sergeant whose expression is carefully blank. They halt 3 paces from the wire. Tanaka steps into the narrow space between the 2 fences. This is voluntary, he says. You may stop at any time. No one will force you. He's speaking Japanese, but he looks at Donnelly when he says it. Donnelly nods. Yeah, he says. This is about curiosity, not circus. Saito sneers faintly. We do not fear your circus, he says. We fear what it costs us to step toward it. No one misses that. Morales unlatches the narrow gate and opens it enough for Tanaka to pass plates through one by one. He places the first in Nakamura's hands. The captain's fingers brush porcelain, then bread. The bun is soft, warm, slightly greasy. He stares at it like it might explode. "What is inside?" he asks. "Beef," Tanaka says. "Minced, grilled with salt, pepper, onion. There's mustard and ketchup." He uses the English word. Nakamura frowns. "Ketchup," he repeats. "A sauce," Tanaka says. "From tomatoes, sugar, vinegar. Very American." "Of course it is," Saito mutters. They all hold their burgers now. 5 officers of an army that marched through jungles on fistfuls of rice, standing behind wire under an American bulb, clutching enemy food like some bizarre offering. Around them, a ring of POWs has formed at a distance, sitting or crouching, pretending not to watch too closely. On the guard towers, GIs lean forward on the railings. "Bet you a carton of Lucky Strikes one of them pukes," a private murmurs. His buddy shakes his head. "Bet you they lick the plate," he says. "Look how skinny they are." Donnelly gestures toward the Coke. Morales passes bottles through one by one, each accompanied by a metal opener. The Japanese officers fumble with the unfamiliar tool until Tanaka shows them. "Like this," he says, hooking the cap and levering it off. The first bottle hisses. A wisp of vapor rises from the neck. The sound, the smell of cold sugar and caramel, the sting in the air as the carbonation escapes. It all feels like some kind of magic trick to men whose last months of war were a litany of shortages. Nakamura brings the bottle to his nose. He sniffs carefully. Sweetness. Bubbles. Underneath, a faint medicinal tang. "A children's drink," Saito says dismissively. His hand shakes as he raises it. "Captain," Tanaka says quietly, almost like a friend, "no one will believe your reports about American food if you cannot describe the taste. It's half a joke, half a challenge." Nakamura looks at the bun, the meat, the smear of ketchup. He thinks of leaflets dropped from American planes, promising plenty if they surrendered. He burned one in front of his men, calling it lies. He thinks of the radio broadcast calling Americans decadent, their bellies too soft for hardship. He thinks of the men he watched die with those words in their mouths. He opens his own, takes a bite. The bun compresses springy and soft. The meat gives under his teeth, juices slicking his tongue. The ketchup hits, a sharp, tangy sweetness that explodes across his palate like nothing he's tasted before. Fat, salt, sugar, acid. His brain scrambles to file it under anything familiar and fails. His knees almost buckle. He chews, swallows. The world does not end, but something inside him shifts. On the other side of the fence, you can hear GIs chuckle. On the Japanese side, there's a strange silence, broken only by the soft, unbelieving sound of men who have never eaten like this in their lives, taking their first, cautious bites of the enemy's everyday meal. Tanaka watches Nakamura's face very closely. For the first time since capture, the captain's expression is unreadable, not controlled, not defiant, just stunned. "Captain," Saito says, half mocking, half worried. "Soft." Nakamura doesn't answer. He lifts the Coke. The cap is already off. The glass is cold enough that it almost burns his fingers. He raises it, takes a tentative sip. Fizziness assaults his tongue, climbs his nose, makes his eyes water. He chokes. For a second, it looks like Saito has won the bet. This is the moment of humiliation. Then Nakamura swallows, stares at the bottle. He looks up at Tanaka, at Donnelly beyond him, at the line of GIs on the tower railings. In the fading light over the Guam Stockade, with barbed wire casting black lace patterns on the dirt, an officer of the Imperial Japanese Army, who marched across jungle islands on rationed rice and hard discipline, takes another, longer pull of Coca-Cola. He doesn't laugh. He doesn't spit. He just closes his eyes for a heartbeat, like a man who's just realized the world outside his island is much larger and much sweeter than anyone ever told him. And that might be the most frightening thing he's tasted all war. Section 3. The morale show no one planned. For a few seconds, time in the compound shrinks to 5 men and 5 plates. Saito stares at Nakamura's face like it's a battlefield map. The artillery officer's hands tremble almost imperceptibly as he brings his burger up. His knuckles are sharp, skin stretched thin from months of underfeeding. The young naval aviator sniffs. His nose wrinkles as if offended. The master sergeant just looks tired. "Go on," Donnelly mutters under his breath, leaning on the fence post. "This ain't a museum." Tanaka doesn't translate that. He doesn't have to. The meaning's in the air. Saito makes a small, contemptuous noise and bites. The bun gives way, the patty presses against his palate, and the ketchup hits him too. Pure, engineered American optimism in sauce form. He was expecting greasy, cloying decadence. He gets something messier. He chews slowly, as if the pace can keep the experience from flooding him. He begins, searching for a word that doesn't feel like surrender. He settles on, strange. Nakamura takes another bite. Strange, he agrees quietly. And not entirely unpleasant. That's as far as he'll go. The artillery officer closes his eyes. For one insane moment, the smell of grilled beef mixed with onions and cheap mustard yanks him out of Guam and back to a long-forgotten restaurant in Yokohama that used to serve Western-style dishes. Hashed meat, demi-glace, white bread. He thought he'd never taste anything like that again after the rice rationing started. He swallows hard. Too soft, he says automatically, but his tongue betrays him. He wants more. The naval aviator takes a carefully measured bite, as if evaluating an unknown enemy weapon. His brows shoot up. He'd expected excess. He hadn't expected balance. The crunch of a lightly toasted bun edge, the tenderness of the meat, the bright snap of the pickle slice hiding under the top bun. He covers his surprise by sipping his Coke. Bad idea. The fizz explodes up his nose. He jerks back, eyes wide, and for the first time, the guard tower erupts in open laughter. Look at Flyboy, someone hoots. He wasn't ready for the bubbles. Morales bangs his hand on the railing, grinning. Easy, fellas, another guard calls. Don't scare him off the product. This is how we win the next war, diabetes. Down below, Tanaka's jaw tightens. He shoots a sharp look up at the tower. The guard's laughter dies down, muttering its way into snickers instead. This balance is delicate. One wrong tone, and the whole thing becomes a freak show instead of what it's accidentally turning into. A crack in the wall between us and them. The master sergeant takes his first bite last. He doesn't sniff, doesn't examine. He just eats. The moment the food hits his tongue, he stops being a prisoner, an NCO, a cog in a Grand Imperial machine. He is a man who has walked too far on too little. He is bone and hunger and the knowledge, deep in his marrow, that there was never enough of anything back there. Not fuel, not shells, not food. His eyes close. A sound escapes him. Not a moan, just a soft exhale, half sigh, half something like relief. He takes a second bite. A third. He forgets to pretend he's above it. On the other side of the inner fence, the rank-and-file POWs sit in tight knots, caught between pride and envy. One young private, his issue trousers hanging loose on his hips, whispers to the man next to him. What does it taste like? The other shrugs, helplessly. He's never had to answer that question before. Rice was rice. Barley was barley. Food was fuel. He doesn't have a language for fat sizzling on a grill, or the way salt and sugar and acid gang up on your tongue. A few, bolder than the rest, scoot a little closer, watching for clues on the officers' faces. Look at Nakamura, one murmurs. He's not spitting it out. Maybe they laced it with something, another mutters, needing the shield of suspicion. Then let them be poisoned first, the first replies. I will gladly die after one of those. Like it's an unwilling chuckle. Under the bulb, the 5 officers eat. Slowly at first, then faster. Donnelly watches, arms crossed, spatula resting on the grill behind him. He's fed Marines in foxholes and Seabees on docks. He's seen hungry men before. These are different. They're hungry in 2 directions at once. Stomachs, yes, but also eyes. Every swallow is a betrayal of the stories they were told. This ain't a fancy spread, he murmurs to Morales. Just barracks chow. And look at him. Morales nods slowly. Almost feel bad, he says. Almost. Donnelly agrees. Tanaka steps closer to Nakamura, keeping his voice low enough that the nearby enlisted POWs have to strain to hear. Well, he asks, how do Americans taste? He knows it's a loaded question. Nakamura licks a smear of ketchup from the edge of his finger without thinking. The gesture is so domestic it startles him. He stares at his hand as if it betrayed him. They taste like. He stops. What does he say? Soft? Weak? You just watch these men haul crates, dig trenches, run in the heat, fight on other islands. They didn't conquer because of this food, but they didn't crumble with it either. Like a country that never ran out, he finishes quietly. Tanaka looks at him a long moment. That, he says, is closer to the truth than most leaflets. He glances toward the Coke bottle. You should drink, he adds, so you can complain accurately later. Nakamura snorts. He raises the bottle again. This time, he takes a deliberate, steady swallow. The fizz burns less now that he expects it. The taste is, how did Americans describe it? Refreshing. He's not sure he likes it. He's not sure he doesn't. It makes his heart beat faster in his chest. Whether that's the sugar, the caffeine, or the realization that this is a daily luxury to the men who captured him, he can't tell. Saito drains his burger and wipes his fingers meticulously on the paper, as if erasing evidence of weakness. The meat is too rich, he says stiffly. It would make a man slow if he ate it often. Would it? Nakamura asks, more to himself than to anyone else. He looks through the fence at a group of American guards wrestling a heavy crate off a truck bed, muscles straining, boots digging into the dirt. They joke as they lift, laugh as they work. They don't look slow. They look well-fed. Your bodies have grown soft, Saito insists. Our men endured on barley and discipline. We were pure. Tanaka raises an eyebrow. Pure and starving, he says. It's a dangerous thing to say. Maybe the war's almost over has made him reckless. Or maybe watching the officers eat has made him less willing to let them hide behind slogans. Saito bristles. The Emperor, he starts, is not here. Nakamura cuts in sharply. Silence slams down. The younger officers and enlisted men around them freeze, eyes darting. Nakamura's gaze stays fixed on the Coke bottle in his hand. He is not here, he repeats, quieter. We are, behind their wire, eating their food, drinking their sugar water. He lets the words sit heavy on his tongue. Sugar. He remembers calling Americans sugar eaters as a cadet, repeating the phrase with the same contempt he used for cowards and merchants. It sounded simple then. Clean. Here, with the taste still in his mouth, it's more complicated. On the tower, one of the GIs leans toward his buddy. Look at their faces, he says softly. That right there? Worth every crate. Morale event, the buddy agrees. Camp's never going to shut up about this. They won't. By morning, every barracks will have some version of the story. Hey, you hear about the nip officers and the hamburgers? They acted like they'd never seen meat before. One damn near cried over a bottle of Coke. It'll be told with laughter, with a bit of swagger. What most of the GIs won't see, can't see, is the other side of the barbed wire. Later that night, after lights out, when the compound settles into that odd, hushed murmur of a place full of bodies trying to forget where they are, 5 officers will lie awake on thin mattresses. Their stomachs will be fuller than usual. Their minds will not. The artillery officer will stare at the burlap roof of his tent and think of his battery running out of shells while American guns kept firing. The aviator will remember diving on ships that never seemed to lack fuel to steam, food to feed crews, planes to replace losses. The master sergeant will think of the men he watched steal extra rice, risking punishment because the rations were never enough. And Nakamura, hands folded on his chest in the dark, will hear his own voice whispering, almost against his will. They taste like a country that never ran out. He'll think of the men still fighting on other islands, told that American abundance is weakness. And he'll know, with a cold certainty that no amount of propaganda can patch over, that those men are going up against something much harder to break than decadence. They're going up against a nation that can put tanks and hamburgers and ice-cold Coca-Cola on the same ship, on the same day, on the same island, and still have enough left to feed the prisoners. That realization will gnaw at him more than the hunger ever did, because hunger gave him something simple to cling to: sacrifice, purity, the virtue of suffering. This is messy, complicated. It tastes like defeat, dressed up as a treat. And as Donnelly hoses down the grill in the dark, whistling, and the Coke crate rattles empty, the first cracks in a decade of carefully built contempt are spreading in the minds on the other side of the wire. They laughed at sugar-eating Americans that afternoon. By tomorrow, some of them will be wondering, quietly, privately, what else they were wrong about. Section 4. Leaflets you could taste. Morning on Guam comes fast and hard. By 6 o'clock, the sun is already a white hammer overhead, beating down on the tin roofs and the backs of men shuffling into formation. The POW compound is a maze of lines. Lines for roll call, lines for latrines, lines for breakfast. Today, there's another line that isn't on any schedule. A line of men waiting to get close enough to last night's 5 volunteers to ask one question. What was it like? They come in 1s and 2s at first. Enlisted men who shared foxholes with Nakamura's staff, petty officers who carried Side-OS orders down to gun crews, clerks who typed reports that now mean nothing. They pretend to be casual, adjusting the cuffs of their POW jackets, stretching, passing by. Then they drop the pretense. By mid-morning, a small crowd has formed in the little patch of shade behind Nakamura's tent. He stands with his back to one of the center posts, cap off, dark hair flattened by sleep and sweat. He did not invite this audience. He couldn't have stopped it if he tried. What did it taste like, Ty? A young private blurts. The hamburger. The word feels foreign in his mouth, half English, half borrowed Japanese slang from pre-war cafes. Nakamura glances around. Dozens of eyes on him, not with the blind adoration of parade grounds. With something raw, desperate. Information is as rationed as food in here. He folds his arms. It was meat, he says. Bread. A sauce with too much sugar. A murmur. That is all, another asks, disappointed. You speak as if it were just food. He hesitates. It was, he says. And it was also something else. He struggles to find a way to say it that doesn't sound like betrayal. When we were cadets, he continues slowly, they told us Americans were soft from their rich diet, that their sweetness would make them weak, that they could not endure hardships like we could. Heads nod. They've all heard variations of that speech. In barracks, in pamphlets, on the radio. Last night, Nakamura says, I realized something. He looks down at his hands. They're still calloused, still thin. Softness is not the word, he says. Abundance is. He taps his chest. We were told hunger was virtue, he says. That our ability to fight on little made us superior. But the men who can ship food like that to islands half a world away and still have enough to feed prisoners are not weak. They are. He searches. Dangerous, he finishes. The word lands like a stone in a pond. Ripples. Someone scoffs. A hamburger makes you afraid? A former political officer snaps. Have you forgotten Saipan? Paliliu? The blood? Nakamura's eyes flash. Do not lecture me about blood, he says, voice low and sharp. I watch my regiment die on Saipan in heat and filth while we share the last bag of rice between 10 men. Those Marines had cold water in their canteens when they took our caves. Cold water. Under fire. He looks back toward the American side of the wire, where GIs are now lining up for their own breakfast. Eggs, more bread, the smell of coffee drifting. Our commanders told us that made them decadent, he says. I'm beginning to suspect it simply made them ready. Silence again. The master sergeant from last night's tasting clears his throat. The men don't need philosophy, he says gruffly. They want to know if it was good. A few nervous laughs. Nakamura exhales. Yes, he says finally. It was good. He's careful not to sound too eager. He remembers the way his jaw almost locked around that first bite. He remembers not wanting to let go. And the drink, someone asked quietly from the back. The Coke. The bubbly, alien sweetness that stung his nose and made his heart race. Cold, he says. It was cold, and it made my head feel light. More murmurs. You see, the political officer says, seizing on it. It is intoxication. A drug. That is how they weaken themselves. They drown in their sugar. The naval aviator looks up. No, he says quietly. We drown in fantasies. All heads turn. He startles himself with his own boldness. In the school, he says, cheeks coloring, they told us America was a giant with rotten bones. That one kick, and they would topple. But from the air over Leyte Gulf, their ships did not look rotten. He swallows. They looked endless. He glances at the fence. At least now I know what fueled the crews on those decks, he adds, nodding toward the mess tent. It was not rice and slogans. The words hang. Dangerous. True. Tanaka, passing by with his notebook, hears enough to understand. He pauses, half hidden by a tent corner, listening. He's not supposed to. He does anyway. He spent months reading their diaries, questioning them, tracing their faith in a war machine that ran on myths. Last night's little experiment has done more to crack those myths than 100 interrogation sessions. Food as leaflet, a message that goes past pride and straight to the gut. On the American side, in the shade of the mess tent, Donnelly sits on an upturned crate, nursing a chipped mug of coffee. Morales flops down next to him, helmet tipped back. The camp's buzzing, Morales says, grinning. Even the guys at the motor pool are talking about it. Did you see the look on that NIP officer's face when he hit the Coke? Donnelly chuckles. Yeah, well, he says, I'll take my medals in stories, not metal. He sips, gazes at the POW yard. You ever think about it? He asks suddenly. How weird it must be to go from die before surrender to line up behind the wire and eat the enemy's cooking in a few weeks. Morales shrugs. I think about not getting shot, he says. But yeah, gotta scramble a man's brain. Donnelly nods. It should, he says. If it doesn't, we haven't done our job. He means the job of winning. Not just with guns. With ideas. He doesn't say it like a slogan. He says it like a cook who knows that what you put on a plate can say as much as what you print on paper. Later that day, in the interrogation tent, Tanaka spreads out a handful of Allied propaganda leaflets on the table in front of Nakamura. You've seen them before. Soft drawings of smiling farmers. Factories pouring out cars instead of tanks. Families around dinner tables laden with food. Before capture, Tanaka says, what did you think of these? Nakamura doesn't need to think. Lies, he says. Tricks. The enemy wants us to believe they're invincible, so we will surrender. And now? Tanaka asks. The captain's gaze flicks from the drawings to the tent flap, where the echo of lunchtime. Trays clinking, laughter, a radio playing swings softly in the distance. Filters through. He remembers the grill. The hiss. The Coke bottle's glass, sweating in his hand. He picks up one leaflet. A cartoon of an American soldier giving a POW a cigarette and a cup of coffee, both smiling awkwardly over the fence. Childish, he says automatically. He runs his thumb along the edge. But less impossible than it seemed, he adds. Tanaka sits back. He hadn't expected that much. Why, he asks. Nakamura's mouth twists. Because yesterday, he says, I ate their lies. He drops the leaflet back onto the pile. They tasted like truth, he says. And that is far worse. Tanaka's pen hesitates over his notebook. He doesn't write that down exactly. He writes, subject indicates change in perception of U.S. softness. Now associates food surplus with industrial capacity. Suggests decadence framing collapsed under direct experience. It's a dry sentence. It doesn't capture the way Nakamura's shoulders sagged as he said it. The way it sounded like a small surrender he hadn't been trained for. As evening falls again, rumors ripple through the compound. Some POWs insist that accepting the burgers was a test of loyalty and the officers failed. Others argue that understanding the enemy is part of being a warrior, even in defeat. Others just lie on their bunks and imagine the taste of ketchup on their tongues. On the American side, guards swap exaggerated stories. One insists a Japanese officer bowed to the burger before eating it. Another swears he saw one blink back tears over his Coke. The truth is simpler. No one wept. No one prayed to the meat. But somewhere between first bite and last swallow, a decade of careful contempt got its first real challenger. Not AB 29. Not a Jeep with a loudspeaker. A hamburger. And a bottle of Coca-Cola pulled from a tub of ice. You can almost feel it in the humid night air. Something intangible shifting in the space between the two sides of the wire. The war's not over yet. They don't know about Hiroshima. They don't know about a speech on the radio in Tokyo that will change everything. But on this patch of Guam, under the buzz of bare bulbs and the smell of grill smoke, the story each side tells about the other has taken a hit. Tomorrow, it will spread further. To new prisoners. To new guards. And the question, what if we were wrong about them? Will keep echoing, quiet but relentless, like the fizz in a bottle after you've taken the first drink. Section 5. The taste that followed them home. October 1945. Opera Harbor, Guam. The war ended in a radio hiss. No parade. No grand ceremony in the POW compound. Just a crackling loudspeaker, an American officer reading a translation of the Emperor's voice, and a silence so heavy afterward you could hear the flies. By October, the compound is a different place. The guard towers are still there. The wire still hums in the sun. But the men inside are no longer enemy combatants. Their names on lists, to be processed, sorted, shipped. Home, maybe, if anything resembling home still exists. On the dock, under a harsh Pacific sun, Captain Nakamura stands in a line of POWs waiting to board a Liberty ship. His uniform is long gone. He wears a mishmash of U.S. issue and reclaimed linens. A POW tag, still looped around his wrist like a stubborn bracelet. He hasn't worn a sword in over a year. In his hands, he holds a small cloth sack tied with twine. Everything he owns is in that sack. A change of underwear. A battered notebook. A folded American pamphlet he told himself he kept only for study, not because he couldn't quite make himself throw it away. And, carefully wrapped in a scrap of undershirt fabric, a flattened Coca-Cola bottle cap. He doesn't know why he kept it. He tells himself it's a souvenir of humiliation. Of a moment of weakness he must remember so he doesn't repeat it. But when the line inches forward and the salty harbor breeze carries the faint smell of diesel and tar, his fingers find the cap and press its ridged edge into his palm. In his mouth, ghost sweetness rises. Behind him, the master sergeant grumbles about the heat. Ahead, the naval aviator stares at the wake of a departing ship, jaw clenched. On the pier, GIs supervise the boarding. They look different without the constant threat of combat chewing at their edges. Shoulders looser. Faces softer. Some look bored. Some look relieved. One looks familiar. Sergeant Joe Donnelly, apron traded for a standard field jacket now that the mess has gone cold, stands near a stack of duffel bags, clipboard in hand. He's checking names. He's also watching faces. Morales is beside him, leaning on a crate. Crazy, huh? Morales says. All that shooting, all that fighting, and in the end they leave on our ships. Donnelly nods. Better than under them, he says. This way they might actually think about what they saw instead of just what they were told. The line shuffles forward. A corporal calls out names from a list. Ine Kimura, Shinji, he mangles. Here, Nakamura says. He steps up. For a split second, his eyes meet Donnelly's. It's possible they never actually saw each other up close during his time behind the wire. Cooks and POWs orbit different parts of the camp. But in that glance, there's a flicker of recognition anyway. You cooked. You ate. We were on opposite sides of the fence and the grill. Donnelly doesn't salute. Neither does Nakamura. They give each other the small nod of men who shared a strange, intimate defeat. You'll get Red Cross parcels on the ship, Donnelly says, as if he's commenting on the weather. Coffee, chocolate, other Yankee poisons. Tanaka, standing a little behind to help with translation, snorts. He doesn't bother translating the poisons part. He says, Tanaka tells Nakamura in Japanese, there will be American food on the journey. You will have a chance to regret your curiosity. A dry joke. For once, Nakamura lets the corner of his mouth lift. I have had a year to regret it, he says. Regret is not as filling as your burgers. Donnelly hears Baga and gets the gist. He chuckles. Well, he says, consider that my contribution to the occupation. You can tell your folks back home that the devil eats well. Nakamura's fingers tighten on the sack. I will tell them, he says slowly, that the devil eats enough. He steps onto the gangway. The ship looms above. Rust streaks down its hull like dried tears. As he climbs, feet clanging on metal, he feels the weight of the bottle cap in his sack. He doesn't know what Japan will look like now. He doesn't know if his family is alive. He does know one thing he did not know when he boarded the transport to Saipan. America is not a myth in a pamphlet anymore. It is a taste, and tastes are hard to forget. May 1946. Yokohama, occupied Japan. The city is a skeleton wearing new skin. Twisted metal and blackened foundations next to fresh lumber and hastily painted signs in English and Japanese. On a street near the port, under a banner that says PX, Allied personnel only, a crowd of Japanese civilians mills at a distance, watching men in khaki and blue go in and out. Laughter spills from the doorway. So does music, swing, high and brassy, completely at odds with the rubble a few blocks away. Nakamura stands at the edge of the crowd, collar turned up, cap low. He doesn't go inside. He can't. The sign is clear. Instead, he watches a GI come out with a glass bottle in hand. Coca-Cola. The red and white label is like a flag. The GI tilts his head back, drinks deep, then hands the bottle to another soldier, who finishes it and flips it casually into an empty crate. The clink echoes down the narrow street. On a corner nearby, a boy in a patched jacket opens a small box and whispers to a friend. Yankee drinks, he murmurs. If you can get a cap, the man on the next street will give you 10 yen. The friend's eyes widen. 10, he breathes. For trash. It is not trash, the boy says, with the weary patience of someone who's been explaining this all afternoon. He puts them in his window. The Americans see. They laugh and come in. He sells them other things. Advertising. Even the bottle caps have become currency in this new, upside-down world. Nakamura touches his pocket. Feels the ridged edge of the cap he kept from Guam. He could sell it. 10 yen would buy rice. Maybe a bit of fish. His stomach tightens. He leaves his hand where it is. Keeps walking. Later, in a small rented room with thin walls and thinner futons, he sits at a crate that serves as a table and opens his battered notebook. On one page, between lists of names of men who didn't come back and notes on supply shortages, he writes, "We believed our hunger made us superior. They believed their plenty made them secure. On Guam, I learned that both beliefs were incomplete." He pauses. The word wrong hovers on the tip of his pen. He can't quite write it. He settles for incomplete. On the street below, someone is selling sweet rolls made from black market flour. They smell like childhood. He closes his eyes. For a second, Guam is under his tongue again. He remembers the look on Morales' face, on Donnelly's, on the guards in the tower. A mixture of amusement and something else, vindication. See? Their faces had said, "We're real. We're not the caricature they drew for you." He wonders what caricature he drew of them in his own mind, and how many bites it will take to erase it. September 1953. Newark, New Jersey. The war is over in newspaper headlines and history books. In some kitchens, it never really ended. Donnelly stands behind the counter of a small diner with chrome trim and red vinyl stools, flipping patties on a grill that looks suspiciously like the one he ran on Guam. Joe's Grill, the sign says outside. He didn't name it. His brother did. He didn't argue. A bell over the door jingles. Two men walk in, suit jackets neat, hair slicked back. They speak quietly in Japanese, glancing around with cautious curiosity. They work for a shipping company. They're here on business. They take stools near the end of the counter. Donnelly catches the sound of their vowels and feels a flicker of time warp. For a heartbeat, the sizzle of the grill sounds like distant shell fire. Then the present reasserts itself. He wipes his hands, walks over with a smile. "Afternoon, gents," he says. "What can I get you?" They exchange a look. One produces careful English. "Hamburger," he says. "We hear you have good ones." Donnelly's eyebrows twitch. He chuckles. "Yeah," he says. "You could say I've had practice." He scribbles the order. "2 burgers, fries, and to drink," he prompts. The other man glances at the menu board, then at a nearby table where a truck driver is pouring ketchup onto his plate in an alarming quantity. He sees the familiar bottle in the man's hand. Coca-Cola. He smiles faintly. "Coke," he says. "2." Donnelly nods. As he pops the caps and hears the hiss, he flashes back, just for a moment, to a humid night on Guam, barbed wire glinting under bulbs, a Japanese officer blinking at Fizz as if it were a trick. He slides the bottles across the counter. "On the house," he says. They look surprised. He shrugs. "Consider it cultural exchange," he says. As he turns back to the grill, he thinks about how weird history is. 8 years ago, he was using this exact combination, meat, bread, sugar water, to crack morale behind a fence. Today it's just lunch. Or maybe it's still more than that. Maybe every bite these men take is another little chip in whatever lies they were told about soft Americans. He flips the patties with a practiced flick. As they sizzle, he catches himself humming a tune from the USO shows on Guam. He laughs at himself. "You're getting sentimental in your old age, Joe," he mutters. He plates the burgers, slides them over, watches out of the corner of his eye as the men take their first bites. Their reactions are so familiar, it's almost eerie. Surprise. Pleasure. A small, involuntary widening of the eyes. He looks away, giving them privacy. He doesn't need to see it to know it's there. He saw it once before, behind barbed wire. That was the day he realized something the officers on the other side took a bit longer to grasp. Sometimes the fastest way past someone's armor isn't through their chest. It's through their stomach. Because in the end, this story isn't really about hamburgers. Or even about Coca-Cola. It's about what happens when a man raised on slogans finally collides with the everyday reality of the enemy he was taught to despise, and finds that reality is edible, tangible, sweet. On an August evening in a POW stockade on Guam, Japanese officers laughed at the idea of sugar-eating Americans, confident that their own hardship made them morally superior. Then a bored mess sergeant laid out leftover burgers and bottles of Coke like an altar to abundance. The first bite tasted like fat and salt and smoke. The first swallow of soda tasted like carbonation and syrup. Underneath, for the men behind the wire, it tasted like something far more dangerous. Proof. Proof that the stories they'd been fed, about decadence, weakness, softness, were at best half-truths. Proof that this enemy who dropped leaflets promising plenty wasn't just waving illusions. Proof that the same ships that brought guns and bombs could also haul ice, meat, sugar, and still have enough left over to feed prisoners and experiment in cognitive dissonance. The guards laughed. Of course they did. It was funny, in a dark way, to watch proud officers choke on fizz. But somewhere, even if they didn't put it into words, the Americans understood they were watching something bigger. A moment when war stopped being pure abstraction for the men on the other side. When America stopped being a caricature in a pamphlet and became the taste of grilled beef and cold cola in a parched mouth. You don't forget your first taste of the enemy's everyday life. Not when your own has been ration cards and empty cupboards. Years later, in quiet kitchens and crowded trains and foreign diners, men who once marched under the rising sun would remember that night on Guam. They might not talk about it, but they'd remember the feel of the bun in their hands, the sting of bubbles in their nose, the way the guards' laughter drifted down from the towers. And maybe, just maybe, when someone around them repeated the old line about soft Americans, they'd feel something catch in their throat. Not just because of the sugar, but because they knew, in a place beyond politics, beyond pride, as deep as hunger itself, that sometimes the most devastating weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet. It's a plate of food that proves your enemy was living in a different world all along. And for one evening, on a dusty island ringed with barbed wire and palm trees, that weapon was a hamburger and a bottle of Coca-Cola, sweating in the tropical heat, waiting to rewrite the war. One bite at a time. Yendi.